Queen's children and older grandchildren. And of course, you are an award-winning journalist for the Daily Mail right here in London. I mean, is that all? Is that all you've done? It's an illustrious and unique career. Now, I mentioned before this chance meeting with Sarah Ferguson on a skiing trip in 1992. This chance meeting. Oh, what are the chances? How did it come about, and how did it change the direction of your career?
Well, it changed my career completely, really. I was a general reporter at the Daily Telegraph, my old newspaper. I'd run a gossip column for a bit. I'd moved into the newsroom, and the news editor said, it was over Christmas, can we get some skiing stories in the paper? The editor wants more skiing, our readers like skiing, can anyone here ski? And I love skiing. I went, yeah, I do. So off I went to the Alps for a few days, and I happened to hear on the grapevine that the royal family, or at least Sarah Ferguson and then Duchess of York, she's not anymore, and her children were in Cloisters, and there was going to be a photo call the next day. And I thought, well, might as well go and do that. So we drove over to Cloisters, turned up at this photo call, got some very nice pictures, and I met the royal rat pack, as they're known. They're a great bunch of, all the royal correspondents in those days, great people like James Whittaker of the Mirror, our own very own Richard Kay of the Mail was there, and anyway, it was interesting. I wrote a couple of stories about this royal skiing holiday. It was all perfectly nice, and then when I got back to the office, I was doing other things, and then gradually sort of more and more royal stories just sort of kept gathering momentum, and the paper didn't have a royal correspondent in those days. And they just said, well, Hardman, can you do it? You did the last royal story, you better do this one. And there were just more and more and more. And what, of course, we didn't know at the time, but knew fairly soon, at the end of the year, it was the Queen's annus horribilis.
Yes.
And everything just started falling apart on the royal front. So by the summer, you had Andrew Morton's book coming out with all those revelations. You had marriages breaking down. In the autumn, I went on my first royal tour with Charles and Diana to Korea, which of course would be their last tour together. By the time they got back, they were coming close to separating. And suddenly one day Windsor Castle burns down. The Queen makes her speech saying it's been an annus horribilis. Then John Major stands up in Parliament and announces that the Prince and Princess are actually separating. Then he stands up in Parliament again to announce that due to the huge pressure from the media and whatever, the Queen is going to pay tax. So by the end of the year, it's been this extraordinary royal year. It just started on a ski slope. By the end of the year, I was writing pretty much nothing else. And I did have other jobs on the paper as well. I got quite busy.
But 1992 was the year I landed in Britain. So I hope I was not responsible for this annus horribilis. Now, in 2007, you published Monarchy, the Royal Family at Work, and that was accompanied by a landmark 5-part television series. So in this pretty short space of time, you had this unprecedented access to the inner sanctum of the royal court. So do you think there's a particular reason or secret that you got so fast?
Well, I'd over the years as a royal correspondent, I'd interviewed some members of the family. I covered a lot of royal events, and of course, as a royal correspondent, there are times when you're absolutely at loggerheads with the palace, and they get very cross with you. But I think I always still am. I mean, you just try and report things fairly.
Yeah.
And I did the royal beat at the Telegraph for 10 years, and then I came here to the Daily Mail to do a broader range of things. I thought, well, I've done royal journalism now for a decade, time to do other stuff. So I started off at the Mail doing lots of other things. And then I was talking to a friend of mine who makes TV documentaries, and he wanted to do something on Windsor Castle and said, would you get involved? So I said, yeah, that's interesting. I know a bit about Windsor Castle. I've been there a few times. And we made a programme for the BBC called The Queen's Castle, which I still look back on. It's one of the favourite projects, one of my favourite projects. It was just great. For a year, we had the sort of access to all the different bits of the castle. And it's a proper living castle, Windsor. It's not, I mean, we all sort of see it on the hill with the flags, and we normally think of it as sort of big royal occasions, but it's actually home to about 400 people. And it's the place the Queen really regarded as home. It's where she spent most of her time as a little girl. And so we were given the run of not just the castle, but the estate and everything that goes on there, the farms on the estate, the people who look after the royal collection, the people who look after the horses, and of course the royal family. So we did that for about a year, and towards the end of filming, we wanted to get a royal interview, and we were told at the start, no, the family don't want to do any documentary. But Prince Philip had heard that we were, we sort of behaved, and we were interested genuinely interested in what was going on the estate. And at the time, he had this role. He was called the Ranger of the Great Park. In fact, he was the longest serving Ranger of Windsor Great Park in its history. And he knew everything about everything that went on in the park. And I was told, look, put in a request, he might talk to you. So I went to see him, and I said, we'd love to have a chat with you for the programme, sir. And I've been told if you're lucky, you might get a sort of 20-minute sit-down chat. And he said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, you rebuilt the castle after it burned down, so you know quite a lot about that. You've lived in the castle for the last 60 years or whatever it was at that point, and you run the estate. So I'd like to bit of all that, and maybe we could sort of drive around the estate, thinking we're never going to get any of this. And he went, well, your car or mine.
Brilliant.
Okay, that's fine. So off we went. We had this amazing day, one of the most amazing days, with the Duke of Edinburgh, getting a guided tour of the castle. Who better? Showing me, sort of saying, this is where the fire started, this is what happened, this, and all that. And then we jumped in his car, and we spent about 3 or 4 hours driving all over the estate. Took me to the farm shop, and going into the farm shop at Windsor with Prince Philip. I mean, the look on people's faces. There are people. There was this woman standing there. I remember she was at the meat counter, and he just looked over her shoulder and went, "Organic, is it?" And she, who is it? What's going on? And anyway, we drove all over the estate. We drove all over the. Took me out to see the polo club. He founded the Guards Polo Club. He planted all these trees everywhere. So anyway, we had this great day. It made a great programme. And right at the very end of the programme, literally, it had started going out. It was a 3-part programme. And the third episode went out, the final episode went out on a Sunday night, BBC One, the night after Prince Charles's wedding to Camilla Parker Bowles. So we actually had a royal wedding in our sort of time, but we only had 12 hours to edit it. So we had to film that wedding, which was an amazing kind of landmark moment. And I remember we were up all night in the back at what they call the edit suite, where you're sort of putting programs together and having to rewrite the script and cut bits out and put bits in. But anyway, we ended with this great moment, really, and it was a great royal moment. It was a real turning point, I think, where Prince of Wales happy after some long period of not being happy, and with the now Queen Camilla, who he loved dearly. It's been a great love story. So that was a nice way to end the series. That he did very well. It was the most watched thing on the BBC. Everybody seemed to love it. So that was, having done that, then we went back and I said, well, what about doing something on the broader picture of the monarchy? So, sorry, long answer to your question, but that's how I ended up writing my first book, Monarchy.
Excellent. But you talked about how you get access because you've always been fair. Now, sometimes sometimes that means reporting things that the palace or their courtiers don't like. So what is it like? What kind of things upset them, and what is it like to be at loggerheads with that court?
It's often surprising things that upset them. I mean, if something's gone wrong, I don't know, there's a row about money, or I don't know, someone, there's a royal divorce, for example, or whatever it is. They know that it's going to get covered, and they know you've got to tell it straight. That's the way it is. But sometimes it's the little things. I remember once covering a state visit. I think it was President Chirac of France, and I'd somehow managed to get the seating plan for the banquet, and I stuck it in the paper, and I mean, golly, everyone went completely mad. It's like, you can't publish seating plans, this is not allowed.
But that's so weird, because now that's just routine.
Well, they don't often, even now, they don't tend to put in the entire seating plan, but then it was part of the problem was, I think, that between me getting hold of the seating plan and publishing it, various people hadn't turned up, and they'd had to rearrange it, so it wasn't strictly accurate. But, funny things like that could get people really worked up. I mean, probably the biggest showdown I had was with Prince Andrew, and it was at the time of his. He'd obviously broken up with the Duchess. He's obviously no longer the Duke. She's no longer the Duchess, but Duke and Duchess split up, and there was a story to do with the financial arrangements, and how it was to do with the fact that she wasn't being given that much. She was running out of money, and I can't even remember the exact details. But I just happened to be a few days later covering a charity royal golf event, and they were both there. The Duchess, I talked to her and she said, "Oh, you must come and meet my husband." I thought, "Oh no, all right, okay." And she brought me up to him and said, "Darling, this is Mr. Hardman from the Telegraph." And he went, "You're the one. You're the one." And I thought, here we go. So you're the one who wrote that very inaccurate thing about my dog. And I thought, of all the things I've written, I think there was a line at the end where I'd said his dog was, I don't know, the dog was very territorial or it had bitten somebody or something or other. And he was very cross about what I've written about the dog and not about the other stuff at all. So you never really know what's coming.
Well, quite. And now the thing is, like, you talked about your jolly day with Prince Philip, but he did have, when he was alive, a reputation as being a bit cantankerous. Did you ever have any loggerhead moments with him?
Well, I actually interviewed him several times for lots of different things, for both my old paper, The Telegraph, and for the Daily Mail, for Weekend Magazine. I interviewed him about carriage driving. And I did interview him several times. And in fact, I got my very first royal interview was with him. And it was on the eve of one of the great moments of the Queen's reign, which was the first ever state visit to Russia in 1994. And this was a really big deal. I mean, no British monarch had ever set foot inside the Kremlin. Really big moment, and the Queen was really excited, looking forward to it. But in the run-up to it, there was a big distraction, which was Jonathan Dimbleby's biography of Prince Charles had just come out and was being serialised in the Sunday Times, and there were all sorts of extraordinary stories in it. And that was really it was taking the shine off this. It was upstaging it completely. All anybody was talking about was whatever that weekend's revelation was in Jonathan Dimbleby's book. And I can't exactly remember how it came about, but I think there was a sort of feeling within the palace that actually the big story of the week actually is the Queen going to Russia for the first time. And I remember I was covering it was in the party conference season, and I remember being at I think it was the Tory party conference, and being told, "Can you get out of there and go to Windsor and interview Prince Philip about going to Russia?" And I thought, okay, well, yeah. And I remember turning up at Windsor Castle. It was a Sunday morning, and I was told you might get 20 minutes, and we ended up having about an hour and a half, and we talked about, I had to put to him, and he didn't want to talk about it, the Dimbleby book and what was in it, and I had to keep pushing on that. But there are ways of doing it. And what I found with him, and I found with a lot of people, is if you just go in sort of route one and treat it as a sort of interrogation, you're not going to get very far. So if you treat it as a conversation, you do. And so we talked about all sorts of things, and he didn't want to talk about the Dimbleby book much at all. It hadn't been very complimentary about him, but he said something which was of use. But what was really interesting was talking to him about his personal connection with the Russian royal family and with all the royal families of Europe. Absolutely fascinating. He was the man who, when they discovered what they thought were the bones of the Tsar and his family, who of course were all murdered by the Bolsheviks in 1918 in Ekaterinburg, and then years later they found these bones. Well, are they the bones? Aren't they? We need to do a DNA test, and we need DNA. And he gave the DNA sample that proved they were. That proved they were. And when we talked about that, we talked about the Russian Revolution, and I said, what's it like going to this country that sort of murdered your cousins? And he just said, well, you can't hold that against a whole nation. We've got to move on. But he was very interesting about the whole, what had happened to Russia. I mean, he was a very thoughtful man. Lot of interesting observations about the nature of capitalism v communism. I mean, hours of this stuff, or hour and a half. I couldn't use most of it. Very, very moving actually when he talked about his great aunt, Grand Duchess Elisabetta, who had been a nun and who was captured by the Bolsheviks and was murdered by them. Well, they threw her down a mine while she was alive, and then sort of started chucking grenades on top of her. And he was talking about this appalling murder. And you know, it was. I just thought this was absolutely fascinating.
Gosh.
And as a boy, he'd grown up. He told me, he talked about it. I said, you know, who do you remember from those days? And he said, well, I had a rather colourful cousin called Dmitri, who killed Rasputin. I thought, well, that's a story. And I checked it out, and yep, cousin Dmitri, who'd got out of Russia and did live in Paris when the boy, Prince Philip, was living there. You know, he used to pop round for tea, and he was one of the gang who killed Rasputin. So here you have this living link. I'm talking to someone who remembers having tea with someone who killed Rasputin. I thought, this is a really interesting beat, this royal beat. And then, of course, the next day we were in Red Square, in the Kremlin, watching all this. So, sorry, a long diversion.
It's fascinating, though.
But those were really interesting days, because the 90s, which is the period when I was a sort of full-time royal correspondent, what was so interesting then was you had these completely parallel worlds. You had the domestic soap opera going on here, which was obviously, you know, essentially the Charles and Diana's marriage falling apart. That was the big domestic story. But on the world stage, all the royal family were doing amazing things. I mean, you know, the Queen was going to, not just going to Russia, she was going behind all these Iron Curtain countries that had never had a royal visit before. She was going first visit to post-apartheid South Africa. She was, you know, becoming great friends with Nelson Mandela. All this stuff's going on the world stage. Prince Charles is going all over the place. Went with him on the first ever royal visit to Ukraine, to places like Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and all that Central Asian belt. You know, extraordinary stuff. Proper, groundbreaking royal missions, and yet they were all being upstaged by the soap opera back home. So you were covering both.
Well, let's go to a viewer question now. We have from Coco VX2NR, who asks, what are the two biggest rumours you've had to debunk over your career? I like this specific two. Like it feels like Coco already knows something. But what are the two biggest rumours?
Well, one, a sort of general one, is this idea that you have to bow and curtsy, and you mustn't ask questions in front of the royal family. You have to wait till you're spoken to. That's not true. You don't have to bow or curtsy. It's optional, and they totally understand if people don't.
And also, actually, you said once you've done it once in the day.
Yeah. You don't have to keep nodding like a nodding dog anyway. But you know, they don't. Some people do, some people don't. It's a matter of personal choice. But what they do like is people to sort of keep the conversation going, because when you've been in a sort of sticky position all day, sort of lots of tongue-tied people sort of going, you know, you run out of things to say. It's one of the reasons that Prince Philip used to come out with what people would call his gaffes. When you think every day of his life, he probably had to meet about.
You've just got to fill the room with noise.
You've just got to, you know, you go into a room. There's 200 people. They're all sort of very nervous, standing to attention, and they say nothing. And he, as he put it to me once, he said, "Look, all I'm trying to do is break the ice." And he said, "The problem with breaking the ice is every now and then you fall through it."
Well, that's a really good quote, and it's a fair point, I think. But it's like when I actually, once in my life, got to meet the Queen and Prince Philip. You know, it's like an Australian reception at the palace. Okay. And I didn't get, I had some, I can't remember now, I had some conversation starters, but I basically curtsied and was moved along because there was just so many people. It was just a split second. I mean, it depends on the event, but a lot of events, you've got hundreds of people, it's 1 hour. You can't stand around and have a long chat. But, you know, over time, you know, if you're, for example, you are at a reception and you're talking to one of them, you can sort of say, I mean, obviously you can't start asking sort of personal questions like, is it true that we were, but if you know, you can say, well, it must have been very interesting to do X or Y, or what was it like meeting, I don't know, the Pope, Nelson Mandela, Ronald Reagan, General de Gaulle, whatever. Or just, Your Majesty, is it scones or scones?
Yeah, exactly that. So, yeah, I mean, that, and then, you know, debunking, I suppose other things are the idea that, I suppose generally the idea that that the Queen, for example, or the King, that they somehow they get sort of bored or tired, or they're having a bad day. I mean, we all have bad days, but overall, I think there's a sort of sense of that somehow it's the job is a real burden, And it is a burden. But I mean,
Well,
the
I mean,
bottom line
Prince
is,
Harry's done his best to make that point.
yeah, but actually, you know, she always liked it. I mean, the Queen, even in the darkest days, she loved being Queen, and even at the moment with the King, you know, he's got his health problems. Still, he loves being king, and I think there's a real feeling you have in that position that you matter. It doesn't matter what age you are, you know, the buck stops with you, and that, of course, there's a responsibility with that. But I think they find it quite energizing.
But I also like that they respect that it's a privilege. They do respect that, don't they?
It's got to be earned.
Yeah.
It's got to be earned. People say, oh, look at them in their palaces with all their flunkies and cars and crowns and diamonds and whatever. Well, yeah, that sort of comes with the territory, but modern monarchy has to earn its respect. It can't just sit there and wait for it to happen, and they do know that. Yeah.
Well, I love this next question from a viewer, KTB2793, who asks, what is the most stressful royal encounter you've ever experienced? And let me sneak this one in, sort of really cheeky. Did it have anything to do with your work as a political sketch writer?
Well, I was a political sketch writer, and sometimes you'd have to do a political sketch and a royal story on the same day, and that could lead to sort of deadline clashes. I remember being a difficult day in, I think I was out in Switzerland covering Prince Charles's royal ski trip, and so we were covering that, but at the same time a British family got missing in an avalanche, so I was trying to cover that as well. And then in the middle of it, word leaked out that Prince Edward was announcing his engagement, so I had to cover that. And I just remember having to write about 9 pages of the paper, all from a hotel room in the Swiss Alps, and you know, in those days you didn't really have mobile phones.
Exactly,
they didn't work.
No smart technology.
So you know, those sort of things are stressful. I mean, I remember I was very, very lucky to be the only British journalist who drew the short straw or the long straw to be on the royal yacht for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, and there was one White House press corps, one Brit and one Commonwealth journalist. And we were allowed to be on the royal yacht and sail across the channel with all the royal family, all the world leaders, on the Queen's yacht, surrounded either side by these ocean liners full of veterans, warships, little boats. I mean, it was the most magical day. It really was.
Robert, I hope you've kept detailed diaries of all of this.
I haven't kept it. It's in my head, but you know, you've got your cuttings and stuff. But I suddenly realised, you know, this is great, isn't it amazing? Whoosh, overhead go Spitfires, Lancasters, or so everything. You know, I'm standing. There's Bill Clinton. You know, there's John Major. There's the entire royal family, and suddenly you think, well, I've got to report back on this to all. I mean, you have to share. It's what's called pooled copies. Yeah. So you are there, but you're doing this. Everything you write has to be shared with the other media. And suddenly you're thinking, oh gosh, hang on. I don't have a mobile phone. This is the mid-90s. And you know, you get to the middle of the channel, and there's no phone box. You know, you've got to file your copy, and suddenly you get to the other end, and the yacht didn't stop. I thought it was just going to sort of stop in port. And
well, you got your typewriter out.
Just and in those days, you did try and find a phone box, and you can dictate your copy. But, and you can't really dictate copy from the royal yacht when it's full of world leaders, because the signal room is quite busy with other signals and people. You know, so excuse me, White House person, can you get off the phone? I need to call my editor. And we arrived, and the yacht was going to sail right up the ship canal past Pegasus Bridge, the famous Pegasus Bridge. Marvellous moment. I mean, just fabulous moment. The whole banks are full of thousands of people, and you're going past Pegasus Bridge and everything. But you know, I keep looking at the watch, thinking, I've really got to find a phone any minute. And it sailed all the way up the ship canal to Caen, and finally I managed to get off and file the story. But yeah, deadlines are stressful, but not just royal stuff. I mean, it was only a few years ago. I was in I went over to France on very late in the day when we saw on the telly that the Cathedral of Notre Dame was on fire. My editor said, well, see if you can get in there, which was a bit of a tough call because it was about 6 p.m. in London. And anyway, but I did manage to get to Paris, did manage to talk my way through. I won't tell you how, bit of judicious lying, but managed to get through various cordons and whatever. And cut a long story short, actually ended up in the cathedral while it was on fire, which was quite something, actually.
Wow, Robert.
But that's a story, and you need to get it back to the office. And as you know, Joe, it's all about deadlines.
Yeah.
And I knew we had about half an hour, maybe an hour left before the last edition of the Daily Mail went to bed. And you've got this great story, but you're in a burning cathedral, and we managed to get out. But there are no, all the phones were down and whatever. Managed to make it work. Managed to get the story in the paper. But it is quite stressful.
Really stressful, but look at you.
Not as
still
stressful
doing
as
it.
being the fireman, of course, with the hose. But not as stressful as being the
royal
with about, journalism.
It's all relative. It's all relative.
Yeah,
we know that the editor of the Mail gets what the editor of the Mail wants. But I like this question from Rayhill 4418, who asks, which form of entertainment do the royal family most enjoy when they're off duty? Is it shooting?
Off duty, I would say, I'd say two things. One is after dinner charades. They do love games after dinner. Charades is a very popular one. I think the other thing, some like shooting, some like riding, walking, fishing, football in the case of the younger generation, painting, the king. I mean, they've all got their hobbies.
I remember. But what about in The Crown when they're supposedly intimidating Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher with their ibble dibble dabble game or whatever it was? Do they like their sort of like rudimentary parlour games? Or?
Yeah, they do like those. I mean, the Crown, I thought, got that completely wrong. They were sort of trying to gang up on Mrs. T.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't do that at all. I mean, they would always try and make the Prime Minister very welcome. And actually, when Mrs. Thatcher came to stay, the thing that shocked me most was watching the Queen doing the washing up when they had the barbecue.
That's her hobby.
And the Queen was adamant that she did the washing up, and Mrs. Thatcher just thought it was completely inappropriate for the monarch to be washing up, kept trying to help. And at one point the Queen was heard going, "Will someone tell that woman to sit down?"
I'm very territorial about the kitchen, I get it.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And in her thank you letter to the Queen, Mrs. Thatcher included a pair of washing up gloves. She felt that she was very worried about the Queen's hands.
But sorry, I put you off track. Back to entertaining pursuits.
Oh, entertaining pursuits. So I think the other thing they love doing is they love swapping stories of things that have gone wrong. I know that at the end of the day, nothing quite sort of makes everyone chuckle like something that hasn't gone according to plan.
Well, we all love gallows humour.
Well, it's I think when your life runs entirely on a sort of script, according to at 10:03 you will do this, then and it's all mapped out. And then something just goes completely wrong, or someone says something inappropriate or whatever. Actually, they find that very funny, and there's a lot of sort of, oh golly, you won't believe what happened today, that kind of thing, and they love that. I mean, they're human. Yeah,
indeed. Now, which member of the British royal family have you found to be the most guarded? Who was the trickiest to truly get your head around and understand how they tick?
Appropriately, the Queen, because she couldn't, I mean, she didn't do interviews. I think I interviewed pretty much everyone else in the royal family, not the Queen, because, when you're head of the judiciary and the armed forces and everything else, you can't really have an opinion. So she was probably the most guarded. I mean, she was perfectly friendly and smiley, and you'd meet her at the odd reception and things, and she was always perfectly pleasant, but she was probably the most guarded. And I think actually the younger ones are today the most reluctant to sort of open up. I mean, when I look back at all the the documentaries and interviews and books and things, and all the chats I've had with the present king. He doesn't do interviews now because he's followed his mother's example. Now he's king. But he'd be very frank about lots of things. Really interesting. He's a very well-read man, and he had lots of thoughtful insights on anything under the sun. But with the younger generation, I suppose, particularly, I'm thinking of Prince William. He's much more guarded. He doesn't do that many interviews, and when he does, they're quite controlled. But then, when I started doing this, it wasn't the sort of 24/7 digital media environment, and the social media did not exist.
Omnipresent citizen journalists, everyone's got a phone, everybody can carve up everything you've said into one soundbite. It's like, it's tough.
And it is, and I think it naturally has just made them more more risk averse and more generally more sensitive to the fact that at any minute someone could be there with a mobile phone, and also, you know, those pictures will suddenly hit the internet and they'll be there forever. And
of course we know that William and Harry are two young men who felt the media shaped their mother's short life.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they're very understandable reasons. They both got I would say very strong reservations about what's said in public. I think it's one of the reasons why Harry's book, I think, was so wounding, particularly for Prince William, was because, you know, there were overall it's a pretty upbeat, it's quite a sweet book. There's lots of very poignant moments in it, but it's simply the fact that these childhood memories that are so precious were being just put out there in the public domain,
commodified,
and that it was really just the exposure rather than the content that I think upset and continues to upset the Prince of Wales, the current Prince of Wales.
So what about on an occasion where you've written something that you would frame as honest and perhaps a member of the royal family would frame as unflattering? How do you navigate then the next meeting with that person?
They're grown-ups. It's like covering politics. Public figures are used to it, and if something's been really, really wrong, or really wounding, then that might lead to an atmosphere. But I can't, off the top of my head, I can't recall that sort of situation. Like I said at the start,
except that unflattering
you can be
portrait
unflattering,
of Prince Andrew's dog.
Yeah. Okay. I suspect. And I over the years, you did write things that you knew that people didn't want out there. But that's life. When you're a public figure, I think what you hope for is fair coverage. It's not always going to be flattering. As Prince Philip once said, complaining about the media is like complaining about the weather. It's just there. It's just what you live with it. But if it's particularly malicious, malign, deceitful, that sort of coverage, then they do take issue. But if it's just the rough and tumble of public life, well, it goes with it.
It's just noise. We have a very forensic question now from viewer La Rumba 4233. Now, she or he, I should say, says the equerries are a very visible part of the King and Queen's engagements, but you only mention them minimally in your book on King Charles. Why was this?
Well, it's a fair question, actually. the equerries are an important part of royal life, and I think they're rather a fascinating one. And there has been a sort of change over recent years of members of staff, generally royal members of staff, not being allowed to talk to the media, even sort of privately, even off the record. So there isn't so much chit-chat anymore. I think the lawyers have got onto them. The equerries over the years are they're fascinating because they're not sort of lifelong courtiers. They tend to be people who are on secondment from the armed forces for 2 or 3 years. And they have a sort of funny role of they're partly gatekeeper. They look after the diary. They're often the first person to do the sort of greetings when important people come. So they have to be chatty, polite, smart, quick thinking. If it's a public engagement, it's the equerry who's sort of walking behind you, has to gather up the gifts or whatever and keep the show on the road, look at the time. They're basically, they're there for 2 or 3 years, and they're right there in the thick of it. And it can be a very, they get to know the royal family very well. And I've seen some of them, in quite difficult situations. I remember we were filming the Queen once on an engagement. It was a state visit to India. And she was presented with this enormous replica of the Golden Temple in Amritsar, a fabulous thing, which was sort of given it. And just sort of turned to the equerry just to say, well, over to you. And I remember this poor chap sort of was trying to lug this thing back to the car, and a golden rule on any royalty, don't lose the convoy. You cannot lose the convoy. And he's trying to get this enormous gift to get it somewhere in the convoy. But those are the things that equerries have to do, and they have to sort of carve a path through crowds. So no, they do. They play an important part, and of course the media love. We love focusing on the King's equerry, Colonel Johnny Thompson. He's been a bit of a star during this reign, and some equerries, of course, and achieved a certain notoriety. Think all the way back to Group Captain Peter Townsend, who was the equerry to George VI, who then fell in love with Princess Margaret.
Yes.
So that is in my book. So I don't ignore the equerries altogether.
And was Tim Lawrence an equerry?
Tim Lawrence was an equerry. Yeah, he was an equerry to the Queen, and then ended up becoming a very valued member of the royal family. Actually, I think he's a great asset and is much respected and valued, I think, by the institution.
Amazing. Well, Donna 1930 asks an interesting question. Robert, when are you going to write a biography of Queen Camilla? I love your King Charles books, and I'd like to read one about the Queen. I think she's awesome.
Well, I think she's done an amazing job as Queen. I mean, it was tough anyway, but then to have to sort of step up when the King was ill, I think she really showed her mettle all through 2024. In my book on the King, there's a lot about her. There's a lot on her. I mean, it's obviously he's the title, but I hope I've done justice to her role, and will continue to do so. I mean, there have been books on her. I'm sure there'll be more books on her in due course. But she deserves a book simply because she's done more for books than any member of the royal family in history, I would say. I mean, she's the patron of several really important literary charities, the National Literacy
I
Trust.
thought you'd meant all the scandal had sold so many books.
No. And that's the other thing. She's been on the receiving end of some really brutal press coverage over the years, and yet I remember her doing a speech at a press awards event, and she just said, "Look, of all people, I know what it's like to be on the receiving end, but a free press is absolutely vital to democracy, and you have to keep on doing this." And she's very good with the press. I mean, if anyone had reason to cold shoulder the entire press corps, I would say it would be her. But she's always very congenial on trips. If there was a trip recently where one of the reporters was not very well, and she took a sort of keen personal interest, make sure they were okay. I think she even sent the royal doctor to go and check them out. And she's fun. There's a sort of levity when she's at an event. She just keeps the show on the road. She keeps spirits up. So I mean, she's a great asset. And as I said, she's done loads for books. And she's got her reading club it's got millions of followers. She has her own book festival. She does the Commonwealth Essay Prize. Like I said, I mean, as someone who writes books, I think we're very lucky to have such a sort of book-friendly Queen.
It sounds like you could write a great book on her. But now you do have, we mentioned at the top of the show, you've got a book coming out about our late Queen, Queen Elizabeth. What are some of the things that we can look forward to?
Well, people say, "Oh, come on, Robert, not another book on the poor old late Queen." Done, and I have written a few on her. But there's always new things to say, and there are new ways to address the subject. All the previous books I wrote on Elizabeth II were while she was with us, and so that inevitably, they were sort of, as it were, works in progress. This is a book to mark her centenary in April. It's called Elizabeth II, and it's obviously going back over a lot of familiar ground, but there's always new stuff comes to light. There are new people to talk to. There are people who haven't spoken to who I haven't spoken to before.
Well, that's the thing, is it because now that she has passed, there are, people can be candid who could not be candid, or can tell stories that they couldn't tell.
There's a bit of that.
Yeah.
And you see, you pick up new insights. Obviously, things that happened in her lifetime, they've moved on. I mean, one thinks just the latest saga with Prince Andrew. I mean, I think everyone is very glad, very relieved that she hasn't had to see the complete ostracism of her second son.
But would it have happened if she was alive?
That's a very good question. I think it probably would, actually. I mean, she always knew that there was family and there's the institution, and there are some moments where you've just got to be tough, and we saw that with the way she handled Prince Harry and Meghan, who she adored. I mean, she adored Harry, always did, but when he wanted to create this half royal role, she just said, absolutely not. We don't do that.
Now, I understand that you have had an audience with President Trump. Did he? Can you tell us anything?
I said, there's always new people to talk to when you write a book. And,
how interesting!
And he's one of them.
So, what? Can you give us any insight on his relationship with any members of the royal family?
It's no secret that he is a great royalist and adored the late Queen and adores the royal family. And I just went to talk to him about that, and that'll be in the book.
Oh, Robert, I really need to get you out for a glass of wine. I need to hear more about this. But for now, I'm going to wrap up this fascinating conversation with one final question. For a man who's met them all and pretty much knows them all, what is the current state of the monarchy? And is there a reason to be optimistic and cheerful about its health for the next 100 years?
Yes, there is. I think it's an incredibly robust institution. Of course, it has its wobbles. It has its challenges. I mean, you and I have covered those. We've talked about a lot of them today. But, when push comes to shove, the British people, and it's all down to the people. It's not, there's obviously this misconception about the royals clinging on. They don't do the clinging. We do the, if you like, the sort of the lifting. We put them there. And as long as we want them there, that's where they'll be. And I see no sign. People say, well, look at the polls, young people aren't that keen on the monarchy. Well, it's true. I mean, it always has been true that the support for the monarchy is generally lower among the young than the old.
You say that, but it's been TikTok that's driven an interest in royal revival, which is a youth platform.
It is, and I think people do. It's not something people think about all the time. That's the other thing. I mean, we do. I write about them. You talk about them on Palace Confidential. So obviously, we think about the royal family more than most people. Most people just get on with their lives. But every now and then, something happens, and there is the monarchy kind of centre stage. It might be a moment of appalling national tragedy, a moment of great national celebration. It might be the visit of someone very important or whatever. I mean, look at world leaders. World leaders want to come to Britain. They're quite interested in meeting the Prime Minister. What they really want to meet is the royal family.
But do you find as well doing this job, the minute I mention what I do, people, it doesn't matter who it is, they always have a ton of questions for me about the royal family.
Yeah, of course they do, and that's understandable. And people say, well, I hope you don't mind me asking. And I think, well, no, not at all. It's I just think it's very revealing. And if you look at social attitude surveys, and they are interesting, and a lot of research has been done on this, when people overseas, when they think about Britain, talk about Britain, the first thing they think of about Britain is the monarchy.
Yeah.
Some might think about, I don't know, red double-decker buses or London cabs or guardsmen in bearskins or whatever. But the number one defining prism through which people view Britain is the royal family. And if you can't see the strength of that, well, then you need to look again, because it's very important.
Much like yourself, Robert Hardman, they are icons.
No, I'm not.
Honestly, I could talk to you all day, so many stories, and I know we'll do this again at some point.